Hello and very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. If you are with us, please share the link and let others know that we are on. This evening, we are going to be discussing a very important and some would say controversial subject, and that is the um, issue that has to do with the police force. The People's Progressive Party um, has never made it any secret that it has been uncomfortable with governing a country where, for ethnic reasons, it does not have control of the armed forces, meaning the police and the army. And back in the 1960s, Dr. Jagan said that the PPP was in office but not in power. Indianist activists have always bemoaned the fact that the African control of the army and the police is an area of discomfort for Indian Guyanese, and that those two institutions are part of the bargaining power of African Guyanese and their political party. When the PPP first came back to power in 1992, there was an effort made to get Indian Guyanese to join the police force and the army. It seems as though that campaign did not gain much traction among Indian Guyanese, it seems, for cultural reasons mostly. Uh, my own sense is that the PPP then shifted to trying to get control of the leadership of the police force and the army. Of course, that process was aborted when the PPP lost office in 2015. Once it was reinstalled in power last year, 2020 August, one of the first things it did was to shift around the leadership of the police force. It became very clear to any keen observer that the police force was going to be one of the institutions that the PPP would pay special attention to. We then began to learn a whole set of things. One of the things in recent weeks that we've learned is an attempt to rig the elections of the police association. And when that did not succeed, then we began to hear other things. We heard all of a sudden that senior police officers, ex-police officers, including the chairman of the Police Service Commission, which is responsible for, among other things, uh, uh, um, promotion of police officers, that some of them were being charged for fraud, for sexual harassment, and it seems very quickly that something was wrong. Uh, this week, the chairman of the Police Service Commission, Mr. Paul Slowe, one of those who was targeted for these criminal charges, came out and held a press conference. And among other things, he accused the president of making at least one phone call to him, trying to influence him to promote a couple of police officers, including one officer who was being investigated for misconduct within the police force. The president, within hours, responded to Mr. Paul Slowe, the chairman of the commission. He, the president, did not deny the phone call, but said that Mr. Slowe's account of what transpired in that phone call is wrong, basically saying Mr. Slowe was a liar, spent most of the response to Mr. Slowe trying to tie Mr. Slowe to the APNU. On many occasions in the statement, he made reference to Mr. Slowe's political and partisan alignment, citing the Police Service Commission employment of lawyers who are members of the APNU AFC coalition. Suffice to say that this past week, that has been the top political story in a country where political stories abound every day, where every other day there is some big issue. This story about what is happening in the police force is taking center stage. We want to delve into it tonight on this program, and we have put together a panel that we think is best placed to interpret what's going on for us. We have Dr. Henry Jeffrey, who's a former minister in the PPP government and someone who I think understands the governance praxis of the PPP, better than most, having served alongside members who are still present in the government. But more than that, is as an academic, his keen analytical eye is also very important. So in addition to his practical association with the PPP hierarchy, his analytical eye as a political scientist and political commentator helps us in no small way to delve into and to sift through these issues. We also have Mr. Kedaki Amsterdam, who is the moderator of Bostonian Morning Time, a popular morning program on the online platform. And he has spent the past week or two on his program going through this issue, turning it upside down. And he, I think, has a finger on the small moving parts of the story. And finally, Mr. Aubrey Norton, who is executive secretary in the office of the opposition leader, but who tonight is not appearing in that capacity. I try to engage people on this program in their capacity, their professional capacity. Aubrey, of course, is a political scientist and a political commentator, but he has practical, like Henry Jeffrey, he has practical political involvement at the highest level, and that's, of course, is an asset. But in addition to that, what he brings to bear, like Henry Jeffrey, is a keen political eye as a political analyst and a political scientist. Gentlemen, welcome to Politics 101. Kidaki, you want to turn on your volume. Kidaki, let me start with you. I said at the beginning that you've been all over this story. Give us an overview of the issue that we intend to deal with tonight.
Well, basically, my interpretation of the issue is one of an attempt to dominate in terms of the president wanting to have his way in terms of having his people in what I consider strategic positions. And that's a part of a wider plan, a plan which I have so far, ever so often, identified You see, I don't believe the Paul Slowe Ali issue started with Paul Slowe and Ali. It's my opinion that it's a wider issue. And like I said, it's an issue of dominion. If one were to check, they would realize that leading up to the 2015 elections, maybe a year or two before that, a number of security services were established in this country. We started seeing a proliferation of heavy firepower in security services. That, in my mind, signaled that the PPP was arming its supporters. It was establishing paramilitary groups, masquerading as security services. Fast forward to the elections of 2020, we would have heard a lot of threats that after the elections, a lot of people would have to run from Guyana. We would have seen when things became kind of uncomfortable or shortly after the March 2 elections, particular security services, I can name Sheriff in particular, as one of those services which provided security for communities it deemed under threat. And those communities were predominantly Indian communities. And so if you continue to look at that trend, what I recognized and concluded is that these services are armed, they're supportive of the PPP, they're PPP paramilitary groups, and listening to the narrative of people like Anil Nandlal is that the PPP is pushing for a civil war of some nature in this society. Black versus Indian, violence of some sort. It believes that it has the upper hand by virtue of the fact that these security services are armed to the teeth. The only thing, therefore, that stands in between the PPP, its armed paramilitary groups, and the black population in this country, which it seems to want to dominate, is the coercive arms of the state, namely the police and the army. It therefore meant that in order to execute this plan which they have, they had to find some way of controlling the army and the police. Like you rightly said, it was tried before because they realized, okay, we have political power, but the coercive arms of the state are predominantly blacks who may not necessarily be supportive of our government. And so the next pillar in that plan had to be to take control of the coercive arms of the state. And so when you do that, you take total control. And so if you decide to run roughshod over the blacks in this society, so be it. And so when you look at the behavior of Irfan Ali with Paul Slowe, it is clearer, at least for me, that that was the final straw, in that the people that Ali is insisting be promoted by the Police Service Commission are not necessarily people of virtue. They're people who are tainted. Karambash is tainted by allegations of sexual harassment. There's a report prepared by McBean which details the statement of at least 2 ranks of the Guyana Police Force. The conclusion of that report says that there's enough evidence to charge Karambash criminally, but they opted instead to charge him departmentally. Brutus, there are allegations of theft of overtime money against Brutus. There's this other guy, McPherson. McPherson, I understand, is a presidential guard. The PSC was contacted directly to promote McPherson, right? McPherson is a what I would call a low rank officer, in that he is perhaps a corporal, at least at the time he was. The PSC was asked to promote him. Of course, they met with objection from Paul Slowe and the others, and so he wasn't promoted then, but eventually he was promoted to sergeant. Shortly after being promoted to sergeant, a request was made of the PSC to promote him to ASP. despite the fact that he never took any of the examinations, much less passed them. And so what you see there is Alli basically trying to commandeer the PSC to shift his people in place. And his people, like he dictated. We're talking about Butas, we're talking about Karmash, we're talking about McPherson. And of course, there are others on that list. Why do you want the tainted officers in place? Because the tainted officers are the ones who you can get to do your bidding. Let us remember when the US refused or advised that Henry Green should not have been accepted as Commissioner of Police because he was tainted. The PPP went ahead and they named Henry Green as Commissioner of Police because they could have controlled him by virtue of the fact that he was tainted.
All right, that's how bring us up to date with the latest round. We had the charges that were leveled against Paul Slowe and others. Take us from there. Walk us through that.
The charges which were laid against Paul Slowe, basically sexual harassment and fraud. Again, if you look at it, in my mind, they're trumped charges. The charge of fraud.
Let's go and go to walk us through what the facts of the story. You'll come to the interpretation just now.
The facts of the story is Paul Slowe, Clinton Conway, Whitaker, and several other former and active senior policemen were approached by, I understand, the acting commissioner of police to review the police standing order. Okay? That work started in the police strategic planning unit where Junior Andrews was the officer in charge. My understanding is that these former and current senior officers started doing the review. They reviewed, I think, 78 or 68 of those standing orders. But because of COVID and elections and so on, I understand the work had to be stopped. While Paul Slowe and Conway and others are saying they did not at any time enter into contractual or financial arrangement with the police force, they later learned that the commissioner had instructed that they be given a stipend. They obviously received that stipend. At one point in time, Junior Andrews was the person who was monitoring and signing off on stipend for them. For some reason or other, he was eventually removed from the department. ASP Kendall, female policewoman Kendall, was left in charge of the department. She continued signing those vouchers. At the end of the day, as they say, cut to the chase, these men and women were charged for fraud. The argument is that, number one, they did not complete the work and in excess of $10 million were paid out. Number two, they should not have been collecting monies because they are officers of a constitutional body and they were already being paid. Right? Basically, those were the charges or accusations in relation to the fraud. In terms of the sexual harassment, the woman police officer accused Paul Slowe of touching her thigh, leg, some part of her body under a desk on several occasions. What is noteworthy from my source, despite the brilliance of this woman, she did not write her statement. Her statement was written by Brutus and left unsigned because she refused to sign it up until such time that she was instructed by Ben and Parag, that's the Minister of Home Affairs and Public Service, that if she did not sign it, they were going to pull her scholarship because she is currently doing a PhD and is a final year scholarship student. So that's about the charges. Of course, you know of the show cause instruction from the Prime Minister. That show cause instruction met with the response that Paul Slowe gave at the press conference. If you look keenly, based on the response of Paul Slowe, they have, in my mind, abandoned that show cause letter and adopted a new one. Show cause, again, this time Paul Slowe is accused of joining a political action against the government of Ghana. I don't know if you guys have seen the letter, but I perhaps can eventually read it for you. But it says, to the extent that Paul Slowe has joined with opposition members of Parliament, Paul and others, to challenge the government in court over the matter of removing the autonomy of constitutional bodies when it comes to their financing. If you remember, when the budget was passed the last time, usually constitutional bodies get their monies voted basically en bloc. Nobody interferes with it. The last budget, and through actions of Anil, etc., that was changed. Constitutional bodies no longer have autonomy because they no longer control their budget. And so that matter was filed before the courts. Paul Slowe, as the head of one of the constitutional bodies, joined the action because his constitutional body was affected. And so they're using that now to say that he is taking political action against the government. Why did I say they abandoned the show cause letter in relation to the sexual harassment and fraud? Because of the response of Paul Slowe. If they were to go through with that letter, the possibility is Alli is going to be called to a tribunal. But if they go through with the political one, there's no need to call Alli to the tribunal. So I think they abandoned what appeared to be difficult and they are choosing an easier route.
Okay. All right. So, gentlemen, we have an overview there of this matter that, according to Kedaki Amsterdam, has very long roots. Henry, let me bring you in here. Try to make sense for us of what all of this is about. You're not, your volume is not, your sound is not on. We're still not hearing you. We're still not hearing you.
No.
Okay.
Are you hearing me?
We're hearing you now. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you again for inviting me. And you seem to have some insight into what I am thinking about for my little articles, because you do it the last time and you're doing it today. Let me give you my take on this, because I think while I accept that there are well, not I accept, go to the literature, go to look what's happening in Israel, look what's happening elsewhere, Cyprus. Anyway, there are only two ways to manage a society like ours that are ethnically balanced. And that is by dominance, total dominance, or sharing power in one way or another. The parties have so far not been into the sharing business, and the PPP most of all has never been in the sharing business. Kwayana told us since the independence process, the British offered to the PPP the opportunity to have some kind of sharing arrangement, and they refused. Later, of course, after boredom has been there for some time, they decided that it would be, Jagan decided that it's a way forward. Now, so that goes without saying that controlling the security arm of the state must be an important element for anyone who wants to have dominance in this country. So that does not surprise me. That has to happen. The question for me is, why the great rush? Why? In August coming, I think this commission comes to an end. The present commission comes to an end. And certainly you can wait until August to do your whatever you want to do. There are two elements here, both of which are important in the Paul Slowe thing. Let me start by saying I'm from Bedford Active, so let me put on the table before people say, he's Paul Slowe. But I believe the content of what Paul Slowe said in terms of the party in office attempting to get their people appointed. I believe this is not unusual in Guyana and I suppose elsewhere. We must remember too, that in 2017, President Granger wrote a letter to the commission. Notwithstanding, the commission said nobody should be trying to influence the commission, telling them not to make any appointments because certain people were under one team under investigation, but the Slowe committee was in process, and certain people are in dubious positions. Some would say that that's a useful thing to do, but you must understand the Constitution did say no one should attempt to influence it. And there was a big row because the press went roughshod about his trying to influence the commission. The second issue is, and I understand that political parties in power want their people, it's like the judiciary and others, in the world, you want your people to be in positions that will affect your policy positions. Whether or not it is dominance or whatever it is, you will want your people to be there. But the one that I find particularly challenging is not I said there are two elements. The element that I find particularly challenging and of great concern is the element when Mr. Slowe claims that the PPP has orchestrated a way to lock him up, a way to charge him and lock him up for refusing to do what he considers to be right. Now we're in a different game here now. In terms of public management, we understand that the PPP has been there before. We remember Ben Sharp, remember what Oliver Ingson, remember I think it's the Kings. But this is a serious matter and need to be challenged in the courts in the first place, because it seems to me that element of what they're doing, not really trying to get their people in power. Everybody tried to do that, not in Guyana, but particularly in ethnically divided societies such as ours, that they have, and I hope Paul is wrong, but he says so, that is his contention, that they have trumped up these charges against him to essentially lock him up and for doing his constitutional duty. That is where I see the danger of all of this. Not really they're trying to establish dominance and whatever. The question for me then, the important issue going forward, therefore, is the nature of the kind of response, because you have to have a kind of response to this kind of thing that we are likely to see, because it calls for response. There's no way that in our society today you can let people wallow in court like in jail like Ben Sharp and all of those people. And therefore, my thing is, what is the response to that kind? That's my question. I understand people shenanigans to get their people in office. The next question for me is, why so urgent? Why are you so urgent? Well, Paul says, and that might well be one aspect or the entire thing. He says the PPP want it up now because they want to position their people to in positions now. Because remember, according to the Constitution, the Police Service Commission can only deal with officers above sergeant and below deputy commissioners. The president has the authority to appoint the remainder. But it is hierarchical. So, like, if you're positioned as assistant now, you got the first jump to become a deputy. So the PPP, he claims, would like to get their people in those positions now so that they can go to the hierarchy and control the force. It may be, as I said in my article, a longitudinal fashion, not a 1 year, 2 year, but if you get sufficient people, they can last a whole term in office if the thing is done regularly. Then there are those who claim that we have a major problem on this in terms of elections right now. People are running after Lowenfield and Mingo and all of these people and so on. But they can stand, you can go at the top of Mount Rima and shout democracy and democracy. You have before you some numbers provided by Lowenfield. Some numbers that claim that somebody attempted in a mass way, 5,000 people, this man is claiming, voted. People voted that were not here to vote. 4,000 some, 600 and something, 5,000 people. You have all the other things there. So if you are going to go after Lowenfield for attempted fraud, you must look at this matter. This matter is a major issue. You can't just say it don't exist. It exists. He has the numbers. He put them there. The police said that the ones that they said that the vast majority of them are true. It is impossible for for Lowenfield and then go and investigate the people that have done those sort of things. Now, but who they got the information, give the information to Lowenfield? The police. And essentially might be useful at this stage for the PPP to have their people in office to at best throw cold water on the methodology used by the police to go give Lowenfield them numbers. And since they're going after Lowenfield now, they got to do that at maybe no, because they got to be. Indeed, as the Americans already know if Lowenfield is right or wrong. They 1 hour and they go on the phone and they can find out how many Guyanese that were in America voted in. They don't have that. They got things. They know if he's right or wrong. The Trump administration might have been willing to duck this, but I am not certain this administration wants to duck it. And maybe that's why, if it has any meaning at all, that they talk about installed governments and all of that. So I think that is where I am at this point of time. It is true that the PPP can only rule Guyana singly if it can dominate this society, if it can dominate Afro-Guyanese. Go to any society like ours, Go. You must be about 6, 7, 5, 6 of them around the world. Go and see what happens. Either that or divide the society, the country between us, like Cyprus. It is the only logical way to go forward. It might have taken Desmond Hoyt a long time, nearly 10 years, to come to that conclusion. But those are the issues as I see them. I have put them forward, in a fashion that may be disjointed in a sense. But they, in my view, are the important issue at this stage.
Norton, you've heard Henry Jeffrey, you've heard Kadaki laying out the facts there, Henry making the linkage between what the PPP is trying to do with those charges and the attempt to influence this commission. He has made a linkage between the charges and the cases against Lowenfield, Myers, Mingo, etc., and wanting to have their persons in place. Do you agree with those linkages? And what else are you seeing in these developments? Your sound is not on. Mr. Operator, please turn on the sound.
Yeah. All right, I've unmuted. Yes. Good evening to all of you and to the viewing audience. I share some of the views, but I think we have to look at some other issues. I believe there are about 5 variables that are determining what is happening here. I'll outline them and then I'll discuss each one of them. First, the attempt is being made to conceal the reality of the PPP's fraud in the 2020 election by making the Lowenfield and Company the victim while they are exonerated, when in fact the evidence leads to the point that that the People's Progressive Party was involved in fraud. Now, the variables I see operating here: conceal the rigging by the PPP in 2020, corruption, and I'll make the links, incompetence, racism, and domination. Let's deal with the first one, conceal the rigging. The PPP would want us to believe what they are saying rather than what we saw. When you look at the recount, which they asked to be streamed live, you saw the unearthing of the People's Progressive Party fraudulent activities, rigging in their strongholds. This information was confirmed by the police at the level of those who were overseas but allegedly voted in Guyana. Now, so what they are doing is, rather than having a comprehensive approach in which you look at their allegations against what emerged in the recount, no, they're not doing that. They are treating everything as if the APNU AFC was involved in fraud and they are the good arbiters that are coming to jail people. Now, that is an unacceptable approach. I heard my friend Dr. Jeffrey said the response should be legal. I want to say here pellucidly, the response should be legal and political action. Look, the reality is you cannot continue to talk while the People's Progressive Party seeks to destroy African Guyanese, Amerindian, and Indo-Guyanese perceived to be APNU AFC. And so, all the rantings of Nandlal, he should be charged. And I say unapologetically, because it is alleged that he was found with ID cards on election day. And how could you have any moral right to even be Attorney General? Add to that allegations of his implication in other illegal activities, and one will arrive at the logical conclusion that you cannot put a thief to watch milk. Having said that, one of the key focus is to conceal what they did in the elections and blame it on the others, I want to go to the next one. The People's Progressive Party historically has been a corrupt party. When you are corrupt, you have to control the judiciary, the police, the prison, etc., to save your corrupt people. And so, attempts to control the police force are clearly aimed at ensuring their people are in place, so when the corrupt activities occur, the police will act in a way that they are never brought to justice. I want to do a little historical review of Paul Slowe. Let us not forget, in 1997, when Paul Slowe believed that the PPP was the government and he should operate in keeping with the law, he did everything to protect them against the protests, including using firearms. Now, this Paul Slowe was put up as a hero, and then one of their supporters was caught with an illegal firearm, if I remember correctly. And the government, corrupt as they were then and they are now, instructed Slowe to give them back the firearm. Paul Slowe, in keeping with the law, said no. And he faced the consequence of standing up for the law. Since then, the People's Progressive Party has targeted Paul Slowe as an individual. One of the problems they have with dealing with somebody like Paul Slowe is that they have no illegality that they can pin on him. His career in the Ghana Police Force has been exceptional. People accept being forms when people say, Paul Slowe like to be more if they believe they violate the law. No intent to be disrespectful to Paul, but I'm just saying to you what people said. And so here you have a man with a certain level of integrity that stands in contradiction to the PPP reality, since they know nothing like integrity. The fact that you could have chosen somebody with 19 fraud charges to be a presidential candidate give you an idea of how they think. They believe that the law does not matter. They believe only power matters. And once they have power, they can do what they like with power. And that is what has to be challenged. So I am saying here that the corruption will need protection. And they would need a police force to protect that corruption. Only today, Dr. Van West Charles was pointing out that the PPP will sacrifice water quality, efficiency, to give contractors jobs so that corruption can flourish. And so, one element of the domination and control is to ensure that the corruption is protected. Then there is the incompetence. To the extent that the regime is incompetent, and they clearly are, because in under 1 year, cost of living went out of control. While you claim to have removed VAT, everything is going up, which means that Ashni Singh is not what they're claiming he is. Throughout his history in managing this economy, he is proven to be incompetent. And so, once they are incompetent, the water sector is going in the wrong direction. Health, as they handle COVID, is going in the wrong direction. Look what they did to the nurses in Linden. So the incompetence will breed resentment. And once that begins to breed resentment, you need the coercive arm to keep people in check as the concomitant effect, the accompanying effect of the incompetence become manifest. Then there is the racism. Many people are afraid to speak about the racism, but I have nothing against any ethnic group. But I do have a position against Irfan Ali and the People's Progressive Party because their actions are manifest racism. In a previous writing, I pointed out that people got land under the APNU AFC. You told the Afro-Guyanese there, you either give it back, pay, or face the court. Okay? That is what you said. Indo-Guyanese who got land in the same process, you did nothing about them. Then Jack, they were behaving as if he is God. If he is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, comes now and say he would have made a deal with these Afro-Guyanese, it does not change the fact that he operated in a racist fashion, that the PPP showed racism. I pointed out in the COVID that in plain sight, they give to Indo-Guyanese communities relief, COVID relief, with their ID cards, sometimes without anything. But when they went to Afro-Guyanese communities, they said they want the landlord and the 15 slips. It is plain open racism. And once you start to act like that, you need coercive arm of the state, the police and the army, to protect your power. And so all that is being done is also being done to help to protect them as they practice racism against Afro-Guyanese and Indo-Guyanese and indigenous peoples who they perceive the APNU AFC. So it is not only racism, it is also political domination. Now, when one looks at the PPP, there is no attempt to even make the racism and the political domination look polished. None whatsoever. They barefacedly go down the road. They argued, and I'll show you the domination. They said anybody who got land below market value should be dealt with in the court of law. Then they should deal with Irfan Ali. I pointed out and produced the evidence that Sam Hines got a house below market value. I challenged them to provide the information of what they paid. And they not only couldn't, they didn't. Because to do that would have exposed their racism and the domination. In other words, they operate in a culture which says, if you are PPP and close to me, then you could do as you like because we dominate the society. Just look at the post today allegedly made by Ejil, where he sends somebody to Kukwani and says to them, look, tell me the people who vote PPP, and they will get hampers. The others, flood must kill them. He's not Noah. Well, I don't even know if you understand the very Bible he purports to talk about. Because Noah didn't give no hampers, no bill of ark. It is alleged for everybody. But I'm pointing out to you, the whole political culture is a culture of domination. When we look now at the regional democratic councils and the NDCs, those that they lost, Dharam Lal, that little whatever it is, he proceeds to seek to dominate all NDCs, even the PPP ones. When they disagree with him, he goes after them as if he has no heart, no conscience whatsoever. And so one recognizes that the whole focus is domination. Now we come to Paul Slowe and the police commission. They do not believe in democracy. And that is one of the problems you have. Democracy for them is a word to be used while they operate in an authoritarian fashion. They do not believe in the independence of the judiciary. They go after judges when judges rule in their favor. They do not believe in independence of the police service commission. If they are not controlling, they must get rid and destroy. They do not believe in independence at all. Even in the party, ask them if they could operate independent of Jack Deo. They have to operate under the iron fists of Barra Jack Deo because he's Lord and God. Now, if you practice that in your party, how do you come outside now and practice anything different? And so, domination, control, and even as you see they deal with COVID, people don't matter. It's not only in water that people don't matter. In dealing with COVID, their friends and family and business matter. People can die, they don't care. What you are seeing here is the re-emergence of a criminalized state that seeks to dominate and recognize that there are some areas that they don't and can't control. The public service, the police, the Guyana Defense Force. And so they are taking every move to dominate. But let us remind them, even if they dominate, South Africa had domination of the police, domination of the military, and apartheid was defeated. And this creeping apartheid in Guyana will be defeated. You can kill people, but you cannot kill their struggles. And so I want to close this section by saying to you, the People's Progressive Party is bad news for Guyana. It's bad news for itself. And as it pursues the domination of ethnic groups and political people that they can't control, they are placing Guyana on a collision course, which they will be responsible for.
That's the voice there of Aubrey Norton. If you're just joining us, you're on to Politics 101. We have tonight Aubrey Norton, Dr. Henry Jeffrey, and Hidaki Amsterdam as our guest tonight. We are discussing the rumblings and the developments within the Police Service Commission. And in the first part of the program, our guest sought to locate what is happening in its larger context. I think we have established that it is part of the ethnic domination, that if you want to dominate another ethnic group, you have to dominate the key institutions, especially the coercive arms of the state. The challenge, of course, is that the coercive arms of the state are majority people by a majority of from the opposite ethnic group, and so therefore the leadership becomes important. The second thing I think we've established in the first part of the program is that ensuring that the police force, certainly the leadership of the police force, is peopled by persons who are friendly and partial to the PPP, enables the PPP to advance other parts of its agenda, such as prosecuting the people at GCOM, such as enabling corruption, as Aubrey Norton has mentioned, such as enabling the business class to get its way. So we've located it in its comprehensive and its larger context, which is, of course, what we try to do here on this program. It's about the police force, but it's about the police force within the context of something larger. Iraqi, let me come back to you. because one of the things that we've seen here is an attempt to get promoted persons who are actually under investigation for serious crimes committed as police officers. You mentioned Officer Karimbash and that McBean report. If you have that report at hand, I would like you to read for our audience some of the conclusions of that report. You have to turn your volume on.
Certainly. I want to go to the last two paragraphs, perhaps. If we go to, yes, the penultimate paragraph reads, there is not enough evidence presented to disprove or discredit the allegations of the policewomen against Senior Superintendent Karimbash. The alleged behavior of Senior Superintendent Karimbash could be defined as unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature within the workplace that can reasonably be expected or be perceived to cause offense or humiliation on the part of the victims. This behavior falls within the definition of sexual harassment under Section 2 of the Prevention of Discrimination Act, Chapter 9908, which defines sexual harassment as unwanted conduct of a sexual nature in the workplace. Senior Superintendent Karimbash's alleged behavior contravenes Section 8 of the Prevention of Discrimination Act, Chapter 9908, which makes sexual harassment an offense. Section 8 of the Prevention of Discrimination Act, Chapter 9908, makes any act of sexual harassment against an employee by an employer or managerial employee an offense. Last paragraph. While from the information presented, there is enough prima facie evidence to support a criminal charge of sexual harassment in accordance with Section 8 of the Prevention of Discrimination Act, Chapter 9908, against Senior Superintendent Karimbash, it is recommended, based on the circumstances and the sensitive nature of this matter, that Senior Superintendent Karimbash be charged under Section 4D VII of the Police Discipline Act, Chapter 1701, for acting in a manner likely to bring discredit on the reputation of the force. It is also recommended that a policy document outlining the Guyana Police Force's vision in preventing and responding to sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment be prepared and inserted in the force standing orders. Respectfully submitted for your information and necessary action, Simon McBean, Assistant Commissioner. Those are two paragraphs. There are other paragraphs which detail the kind of sexual harassment and which detail the actions of Karimbash, which resulted in these reports being made against him. For example, he approached one of the females and asked her for her number. She refused. She said she didn't have a phone. He instructed her to take his number and store it under another name. When he realized that she wasn't calling him as he expected, he started pressuring her, according to the report, by every frivolous thing he punished her for.
And I suppose this is important because he's one of the persons that the president allegedly approached Paul Slowe and asked him to promote him. Is that true?
Yes, certainly. He is one of the persons. When based on the Paul Slowe press conference, Slowe is alleging that when Ali asked him about his people, there were two specific persons mentioned in that conversation. And one is Karimbash, the other is Brutus.
Henry, let me come to you. You said specifically that you believe Paul Slowe. You made your disclaimer that you're from BV, but you said you believe Paul Slowe. And if you believe Paul Slowe, do you think that this rises? Well, you hinted this rises to a case of a high crime?
Well,
yes, go ahead.
I said, I specify what I believed about Paul Slowe.
Mm-hmm.
I said that I believed that the president spoke to Paul Slowe
Mm-hmm.
in terms of getting his people into office. That for me, not an unusual thing that goes on in Guyana and elsewhere, trying to get your people in those high
Mm-hmm.
offices. But as I said, Paul Slowe then went on to say that he believes that this is because they have raised charges against him, which can get him in prison.
Right.
And he believes that this is a reason, that this is because of his reluctance to do as they say. I say that needs some serious investigation because it takes the question of coercion into public management,
Yeah.
and it needs investigation and should be dealt with because, as I also said, the PPP has gone this route a little bit before. Indeed, there is public perception, at least, that the PPP has gone this route before in terms of bench thing and so forth. Therefore, this matter is important because it's saying to public officers, if you don't follow the rules or follow not even the rules or request, X
Can happen.
thing can happen to you. So from that standpoint, I take that on. I'm
Who should investigate? Well, go ahead. Let me don't stop you.
who should do the investigation.
Investigation.
Certainly, if you're going to charge Paul Slowe with whatever fraud and all of those same people should do the investigation. They should, the police authorities that will do, because what essentially Paul is making is a complaint. He's saying this is what happened, and the police should do it. That doesn't mean that civil society should not have their input, but
Yeah.
an investigation should go on to find out. And if that is so, well, then maybe it's high crimes and whatsoever and whatsoever. If that should turn out to be so.
That kind of thing. We getting us feedback from somebody. That kind of investigation, would it fall? Miss Operator, can you please regulate that? That kind of investigation, would it fall under Suku?
Well, I'm not certain, but I don't know. But I'm certain one thing, that if they weren't Suku, the police would have to do something like that. And therefore, whosoever the investigators are, but it is not to leave it alone to them as such, but to have a consistent eye on what they're doing, to know that they are doing the correct things. I listened to Aubrey and I said to myself, you know that if we brought Nandi Lal or another PPP spokesman of that nature, he would make a similar case against the PNC. He would sit there right now and make a similar case against the PNC. Whether or not he's right or wrong, he'll make it. The question of in Guyana, we got to understand, he'll make a case of how the PNC is corrupt, incompetent, and he'll get the PNC supporters agreeing with him. But that is the problem in Guyana. There is no public opinion. Afro-Guyanese, maybe to the man would believe Aubrey this tonight, and if the PPP man go on the stage, Indo-Guyanese almost to the man would believe him. So what happens? And that is the problem of Guyana. We have to realize that you are not going to, once the PPP and the PNC exist, maybe even if they don't exist, they'll be made over. And once they exist, they have to have some kind of relationship together to govern this country. Aubrey speaks this thing about thing, or the other PPP man speaks this thing about the people, don't in any way win the other side over. He's talking to his supporters, they're talking to their supporters. But Guyana need to be governed together, or else all the aisle down there, people gonna sit down and carry it away just like they took away everything else. We got some of the best resources and remain poor. The corruption, the incompetence, and all of these things are our outcome of that problem. There is no united public opinion that if you say those things tonight, people can say, oh, and you'll get 60% of the people on your side because you are correct. Or if the other side comes, are 60%. It's not going to happen. And therefore, the answer is you have to sit down and work together. And more than that, this society is moving in that direction. This society is moving in that direction. The PPP alone could have won an election in 53, in 1992. They can't do it today. They are 40% of the population, Indian, Indo-Guyanese. The African might be 30%, but much of what we call mixed and so on are normally, because we're talking ethnicity here, not race, of African ethnicity. So they're coming right up to the 40% and maybe more, because that lot is 20%, those mixed people. So effectively, and that is why the PP has gotten into this kind of election manipulation. It's got there because of what happened in 2011. 2011, it knew since about 2006, but 2011, it did not want again to happen. Because 2011, you had it winning the plurality. It lost the election, as a matter of fact. But it's the Burnham Constitution that gave it the presidency. So effectively, they did not want that to happen again in 2015 and went about their shenanigans. We have to come to understand that now, as we stand, the PPP cannot win an election alone. And the question for Aubrey and the politicians, in my view, is how to organize to take advantage of this step that was not there. That was not there in 1992. And I am not saying that this is the end all and do all of it. The APNU and AFC won an election. Indeed, we all went and harassed almost the AFC to join with to make a shake. A small party gets together with one of the larger parties and take government in a country like Ghana. You still got a 45% of the people left out and are ethnic. This is not like if we were all considered white people. Now I'm not even white, English, let me say, because look what happened in Northern Ireland. I mean, the thing. It is not like if we are all thing. We have these, when you get them left out, even if you believe that you are doing a good thing and that you want to reform the sugar industry, when you got knock off 7,000 essentially PPP supporters, what do? They will turn it into some propaganda that you cannot overcome, even if your intentions were good. So you have to be able to bring them to the table. You have to be able to sit with them, or this country will not progress. The PNC, the last article, well, the second last, I think, or something, I wrote in Stabic News, I said, all right, Orphan, President Alli had said that he is going to bring Guyana to the, I end by saying, show me. I think that was the heading. He can't do it. It's not doable. Nobody has done it since this country has been in existence. It cannot be done unless you are prepared to sit and share power. Watch it, how the society is developing more like Suriname, where people ask, you have to have a whole lot of give and take. Indeed, to get the presidency, you gotta get 2/3 majority. So effectively, that's where it's going. But because we got two large groups, Suriname has a whole lot of smallish groups. We have two large ethnic groups who control 80-90% of the voting population. When one win with a baby party, suppose the PPP, as it appears, that's going already go, the Amerindian party had got the highest votes of the small party at the last election, because the Amerindians are coming to realize that if they can do it, if they are Africans and the Indians can do it, they can do it too. Smart, if they use it smartly, they can almost be the president of this country if they take out the plurality. Because at end of any election, if they get rid of that plurality, either the PPP would be below the 50 or the PNU. And all they got to say, well, I'm going to join the man who made me the president. And it happened in St. Lucia.
St. Vincent.
St. Vincent. And if indeed they go and tie up with the PPP like they appear to have done, because what right they have to the deputy in parliament? What right? None. It's nonsensical. None. So they look like they're going with the PPP. That would not help the PPP or them, because it will lose them both. But a serious Amerindian party can get 10% of the vote. So effectively, that you have to strategize even to get there. But the major issue that you face, even if that occurs, is how you're going to bring the two large ethnic groups and make them work together. That alone will not do it. Guyana, not Suriname. You got two people, two groups control 80% of the voting population, more than.
Henry, while I have you on this issue, you had written in the past that the PPP from around 2006, when they noticed that the numbers are beginning to change, had made a deliberate effort to begin to look to see how they can manipulate the system.
I mean,
no, but, I need to make a few points on what Henry said.
Hold on, I'm coming to you, Aubrey. Let Aubrey just let.
I said, it is clear. Look, elections. This is another thing. Elections are not rigged on election day. Anybody with any sense knows elections are not rigged in election day. Elections are rigged long before elections day. People do all kinds of things to gain. They harvest votes. They take people who die and keep. I'm not saying the people do it, because I don't know what they did. But they recognized that they were in jeopardy and they acted on it. But I am not here. But what I'll tell you, a man from Barbados, a fellow from Barbados, that's what drew my attention to this. A fellow from Barbados during the last election wrote and said, but I left Guyana as a little boy. How come I voted in Region 9, I think, Region 1? How come I voted? I had just finished reading How to Rig Elections and reading about Zimbabwe, where these people harvest votes. So although you might think your child died in childbirth, they will keep it active and just vote get somebody to vote at the time. 18 years. When man said 18 years, the writer asked, 18 years you chaps would do that? You know what is Zanu man telling? He said, you gotta get up real early Son.
I mean,
You know,
I want you to answer, among other questions, what to do about the possible violation of the Constitution by Irfaan Ali, and then I'm sure there are a couple of things that you want to respond to that Henry put forward.
I thought I should respond to Henry because Henry knows full well that I have been a persistent preacher of shared governance and the two parties working together. Henry would also know that he lobbied me for this matter, and many of us, I think I remember Sherwood Lowe among others, agreed in principle we should move in that direction. Robert Corbyn then agreed to what was called constructive engagement. You start to laugh, Henry. I know why you laugh. Robert then agrees to constructive engagement. We put out a menu of measures that were likely to be taken. And so the intention was to move in the direction of some form of shared governance. It was then reported, I don't want to say by who, that when Mrs. Jagan got the information, she said no to shared governance. She said no to any cooperation with the PNC. And that was history. I don't want to go back through Burnham attempts. While I believe in what Henry is saying, one has to look at who you are dealing with to be able to determine if what you're saying is practical and could be made reality. I did express the view to Henry years ago after Jack Dale didn't go ahead with what he had agreed with, etc., that I didn't believe Mrs. Jagan was the sole person that caused a reneging, that it was Jack Dale himself. And events after 2006 to 2009 suggested that the PPP in its present form had no interest in constitutional reform that mattered. I want to make this point. James McAllister, Sherwood Lowe, and I, outside of the PNC, went to that Constitutional Reform Commission and presented a paper on what we thought should happen, even though we got flack for it in the PNC, and put out clearly an approach. I always remember the response of the People's Progressive Party in Jack Dale. It cannot happen if there isn't mutual trust. And when asked, what do you mean by that and how we build mutual trust, Jack Dale went down the direction of domination and control. I don't want to go into what happened, which Henry would know about, when we were discussing the post-Lomi agreement. I think that is when he ended up leaving or being put out. I don't want to say how he ended up outside. But the point I'm making to you is that for you to have what Henry is talking about, you need a partner that shares your view. And since I am convinced and have sought to illustrate over the years that they are not interested in those solutions, they are interested in control and domination. And so while ideally we should be looking in that direction until an environment conducive to it is created, this will be the battle that is ongoing. And no one should sit down and allow the PPP to dominate them while you pursue some form of power sharing or inclusive governance. I believe in inclusive governance, but I do not believe the people that we are dealing with and relating to, they have any interest in anything outside of domination. Now, as it relates to the violation of the Constitution, it is not new. When the PPP came to power, and Sam Hines was the puppet prime minister, The Constitution had stated he should be head of government business in the House. And endless struggle occurred before they finally allow him to become it whenever it was extremely late. The Constitution is generally violated by the People's Progressive Party. Look at the handling of the independent constitutional institutions. They have changed the law to ensure domination. Look, I am satisfied that our solution at this stage, in the long term, once you're in government, I think more measures need to be taken to have some form of inclusive government. But as presently constituted, I am convinced that the PPP hopes people will think they're building a one Guyana while they do things that create two Guyanas. And so I believe that the time is nigh when we have to intensify our political work to take on the PPP politically. They are not going to respond to conferences. When I became General Secretary in 1997, we began a process of working, etc. And there were many times when we were talking about discussing an inclusive governance. The PPP never budged. The only time they budged is after the 1997-98 protests, in which there was constitutional reform. And some mechanisms were put in the Constitution to help the process, including a procurement commission. They violated the law and never implemented them. The people only understand political pressure. And so, in my opinion, yes, we need to challenge them in court. Yes, we need to challenge them in parliament, but we have to prepare to challenge them in all other areas because they have no good intention. Their aim is domination. They intend to destroy and marginalize Afro-Guyanese. They intend to destroy and marginalize every Indo-Guyanese and indigenous person who support the APNUFC, including burning down the butcher shop. So, in my opinion, we now have to move to intensify the struggle in some other directions. That is my candid view on this.
Let me pin you down there, Aubrey. Do you think that this matter of trying to influence the leadership of the police force is the moment for that intensification that you're talking about? We're not hearing you. You're off. Mr. Operator, please keep the guests on so that they don't have to every time go to their thing. Yeah. Please keep them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to do work among the Ghana Police Force and the Ghana Defense Force to let them understand that they're being used against Guyana's best interests by the People's Progressive Party. Is it not interesting that every time a letter goes out for show reason why, it's Mark Phillips? Do you think that is by accident? He merely replaced Sam Hines in that role. Wherever it is something of that nature, a Mark Phillips emerges. Now, I'm saying to you, we have got to intensify this struggle. We have to meet out to members of the Ghana Police Force and let them know that we are their friends and not their enemies. It is the first time in the history of this country, I know, you discharge people, then investigate. What nonsense you telling me? When you charge Lowenfield and company, and now you are asking the courts to give you documents so you can make a case. It is absolutely berserk. It shows you the nature of the People's Progressive Party. And the cases that they have evidence for, as it is just alleged with Karimash, they have no interest in that.
Kidaki,
I'm saying, I want to make one last point.
Yes.
We have got to do work like we did in 1997 to say to the police and the Guyana Defense Force, you're being used against your country's interests, you're being used against your best interests, and that the people that are using you only interested in themselves and their families. If you look at their treatment of even their constituencies in many matters, you will see this is not about the people of Guyana. It is about a PPP cabal that wants to dominate, control, and have all the wealth at the disposal. Last thing, I have always challenged Jack Deo, Irfan Ali, and company to put their salary over the years against their wealth. And if it is in keeping with banking standards, then we'll accept that the wealth is decent. If it isn't, let it charge themselves.
Kidaki, do you think that this police situation here offers an opportunity for an intensification of the struggles as Aubrey has framed it?
Yes, quite frankly, I believe that the Slowe situation has offered the opposition a gift on a platter. And I'm hoping and praying every single day that they maximize the use of that gift. There's so many angles from which the opposition can come at the illegitimate government and the coercive arms of state in this situation. Let's start, for example, interference in the work of a constitutional body. Article 180 says that the president can be asked to leave office. It might be a testing process, but I think it is something that ought to be engaged in. We know for a fact that as part of the domination plan is to move their people into certain positions in the coercive arms of state. Charge Karen Bash for criminally as against departmental charges. If the DPP won't charge him, if the police won't charge him, file private criminal charges. Don't tell me the DPP will take it over null pros. Let them show their hands like that. There's so many things which the opposition can do to utilize this quote-unquote opening for intensifying the struggle that will perhaps set this society on the right path.
Aubrey Norton says we have to educate the people in the police force. Kidaki Amsterdam says move to the court, perhaps file private charges. Henry Jeffrey, is that going to, first of all, are those things feasible? Do you agree with it? And do you agree that this is perhaps the moment to move in the direction that the country needs to go?
I believe that any political party worth its salt must have long, medium, and short-term goals. When I spoke just now to the whole question of shared governance, I did say that the PPP was refusing it till the 70s, since independence. And once they had the majority, they thought that they had a right to rule because somehow they saw democracy as majority rule, which it is not. Democracy is not. Democracy is majority rule within a constitutional context, or else Trump couldn't win the presidency when he did it in the United States. So it's not. It must have, depending on its specific context, some medium and short-term goals. I stated from a constitutional point and a demographic standpoint where I believe the medium-term goal could be electorally. But you are confronted with a group of people that cannot run Guyana without dominating it. And therefore, you must also be organized to respond to that. You have to respond to that. So effectively, I am saying yes, You got to sell a vision, a long-term vision. This is what we are going to, this is where I hope Guyana would do, Aubrey was trying to say. This is what Guyana, this is what we hope Guyana would come to, where we sit down at the table and make decisions about our lives together, and Exxon and everybody else, don't they running away with everything we got. We understand now in this, the PPP has shown since day one, they don't want that, but at the time they had 53%, but now they got 40 and they still don't want it. So they have got involved in manipulating elections to push back the natural process of the state. We see for one of the major struggles must be to have a clean list and a clean elections. And the party go, there's like a medium term goal. Clean list, clean elections, and let's move it. Prevent people from doing these jiggery-poggery about elections. And certainly, if you are worth your salt of the party, you have to take on any person that is set towards dominance. And that got to come at various levels. When I said you have to have legally, I'm saying that they said there were nearly 200 ways of protesting non-violently. There are 200. The state, in their response, might force you to act violently, but there are over nearly 200 ways. But you have, particularly in a country such as ours, you have to be prepared. It is in, Aubrey spoke to the 2000 constitutional reform. The Mormons done a court and the St. Lucia statement allows Ms. Jagdio to give up 2 years over a term or something. And that's where I start going on with more fire, because parties don't give that up easily. So effectively they were brought to the table because it was organized and willing to take you on. And therefore, any party, PPP, PNC, all of them, if you are faced with domination and that sort of a thing, you have to be able to say, I'm going to respond. I mean, that goes without saying. How you organize that response is the strategic problem, because there are various ways of organizing that response, and we have seen it in how people organize it around the world.
Thank you very much, Henry Jeffrey. We are past our time, but I can't end this program without going back to the party people here. Kidaki's WPA, Aubrey, your PNC. There seems to be consensus that something needs to be done. What you yourself, Aubrey, refer to as an intensification of the struggle. Your last words, I want you to address that frontally, because reading the comments, people seem to be agreeing with Henry Jeffrey and you and Kidaki that this offers any party worth its salt, according to Henry Jeffrey, an opportunity to up the ante. Volume, we're not getting any volume. Mr. Operator, please keep their audio on.
Yeah. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
Okay. My was follows. It's not the police.
You're very muffled.
All right. Are you hearing me now?
I'm hearing you clearly now.
Well, all right. I'm saying, here you have a situation where, coming out of this election process, the chairman of the election commission apparently was in agreement right down until whoever got to her. But there is no attempt to charge her, which suggests the direction they're going. Now, I believe a combination of things created the conditions for protest against the people. The treatment of the force in general and the attempt to dominate it. 2, the treatment of the Ghana Defense Force over the years and the attempt to dominate it. 3, the high cost of living that has emerged even though the PPP had a lot of platitudes. I think that would have contributed. They attempt domination of NDCs, etc. The discrimination, political and ethnic. The pomposity and barefacedness of the PPP and the regime. I think all of those things have co-mixed to create conditions for this regime to be taken on. Because it should be evident to all that nothing is going to be done with just talk. All that we have achieved, including constitutional reform in this country, came as a result of protests. And the only thing the PPP understand is that I agree with Jeffrey. There are many ways to protest, and those details have got to be worked out. But I also want you to understand that this is being done in the context of COVID, where they are using the laws selectively to ensure that you can't do certain things. So there are a lot of strategic things to be sorted out. But I close by saying, I think we have done a fairly good job of educating the Guyanese on what is happening. We need to move from educate to agitate. And then
we have to move from educate to agitate. That's, if I were preparing tomorrow morning's newspaper, that would be my headline. Lucky Amsterdam, do you agree with that?
Yes, I certainly agree with that. As a matter of fact, I want to toot my own horn and say I've been calling for agitation for moons now, several moons now, as they would say, since I was a boy. I'm happy that Aubrey and other elements of the opposition are now at this point. I think the time is opportune for agitation. We have had a long hiatus, and the time is now to agitate. We have all the elements coming together that should really encourage people to agitate. Aubrey himself highlighted some of them. And so it is now for those in leadership in the opposition to use their influence and let the agitation begin.
Let the agitation begin. Kiraki Amsterdam himself, an executive member of the Working People's Alliance. We've heard from the party people here tonight. They have gotten some support from those of us like Henry, who doesn't walk the halls of power, but recognize, and I quote him, any party that is worth its salt must engage and push back about on what is happening now. Gentlemen, thank you all very much. The audience was tonight. They were quite vocal. They seem to be energized by our concluding section. Want to thank you all for coming on, and you will certainly hear from me in the very near future as we move into another week. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir.
Well, there you have it, audience. We're always the first day, right? So Mr. Aubrey Norton has said that it is time to move from education to agitation. Mr. Kedaki Amsterdam from the WPA says that agitation should be the order of the day. Henry Jeffrey, who doesn't belong to a political party, has said that any party that's worth its salt must push back against the domination. Yes, there is a long-term view that we have to have power sharing. Yes, there is a long-term view we've got to have constitutional reform. But the factors, high cost of living, ethnic discrimination against African Guyanese, interference in the police force, interference in GCOM, trying to criminalize people in state apparatuses that you do not necessarily agree with. I would add to that a foreign policy that compromises Guyana's sovereignty. I will also add a media that is so lopsided in its coverage that it amounts to a violation of the right to free speech. When you put all those factors together, I have no hesitation in supporting the call tonight for a movement from education to agitation. And I've said on this program, we educate, but we educate as a means towards agitation, and that agitation must be towards the end that is freedom. The freedom is not an abstraction. Freedom is something that people must feel. People must feel free. It must not be a cosmetic freedom, a theoretical freedom. Freedom must be a practical thing. So the movement from education to agitation has begun on this program tonight. I know lots of you in the audience have been waiting for those words to come from those who walk the halls of power, those who head the major opposition political party. And tonight, they've said it in the words of one of the leading members. I want to say that it's clear that no one is talking about violent uprising. Nobody talked about that tonight. What we talked about is the right to protest against a government that has overreached. And the immediate task is to put that government back in its place. To put that government back in its place. In fairness to the opposition, it has taken a lot of blows since August 2nd for acting in ways that are consistent with the Constitution, but I think they were right to do that. And they're right to continue doing that. And so to move the movement from education to agitation. Good night. Next week, we are going to be spending some time on that question of moving to knock Lowenfield and Myers and Mingo off. I rather suspect that that movement is similar to the movement to control the police force. Henry Jeffrey made the connection between controlling the police force and controlling GCOM. Next week, we are going to expand on that. Until the next time, David Hines, thanking you for tuning in to Politics 101, where we educate, agitate, and love. Thank you.